Our speaker, Harry Goldstein, I pronounced it correctly, who is currently a postdoc at the University of Maryland, and he received his PhD early this year from the University of Pennsylvania. And Harry's research has been on property-based testing. And I must say I'm very impressed by Harry's profile, especially the number of papers he has written, especially given he is still a fresh PhD graduate. And he is a recipient of a Distinguished Paper Award at the ICFP 2023 last year, and a new one at ICSE, International Conference on Software Engineering this year. Both about property-based testing. And today, Harry is going to tell us how to thrive, or rather, how to thrive as a PhD graduate. Take it away.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Yes, I am Harry Goldstein. I'm a postdoc at the University of Maryland. I did my PhD at the University of Pennsylvania with Professor Benjamin Pierce. And yes, today I'm going to talk about my PhD compass. And importantly, this is not a trail map or a checklist or anything like that. It's not a complete list of things to do or kind of points you must hit. A PhD is just too personal for that. Instead, what I'm hoping to give you is a compass, some kind of directions to go in to keep you on track as a PhD student. I hope some of you are new PhD students or planning on being PhD students, and I hope this is helpful for you. I want to start with a quick disclaimer. I think there's a few reasons why it's worth listening to the advice I'm going to give you today. I had a good time during my PhD. I had fun, and I'm glad that I did it. My PhD was, by some kind of standard metrics, successful. I published some papers, I went to conferences, I did the things that people try to do as a PhD student. And I was invited to come here, and you're already sitting here, so you might as well listen to what I have to say. But there are a few reasons you should take what I have to say with a grain of salt. First, survivorship bias is a real thing. At things like this, at events like this, you're mostly going to hear from folks who were relatively successful. And that's a problem because I might give you advice that says do X, and someone who dropped out of their PhD might have done X, but you're probably not going to have heard from them to know that that advice could go both ways. And so just keep in mind that survivorship bias is real. Also, I think success in academia in general requires quite a bit of luck, and I think I've been quite lucky. And also, I have quite a bit of privilege. I'm a cishet white man, and so your experiences may be different from mine when it comes to certain challenges, and I just want to acknowledge that. And finally, every PhD is different, and so my advice might not generalize. Although for this, I actually do have a solution, which is you should listen to other people who've given similar talks to this one. So talks like this happen at pretty much every ICFP PLMW and also most of the other PLMWs. Sam Westrick has been giving a talk like this for the past couple of years. Amal Ahmed has one too. Go check those out. Their experiences are a little bit different from mine. You can get a more balanced perspective. So without further ado, we're going to get into the kind of 6 directions that I'm going to point you in. And the first one is to know what you're signing up for. Now, all of these pieces of advice are kind of aspirational. It's impossible to know before you start a PhD what you're signing up for. You really have to find out while you're doing it, but there's things you can do ahead of time to know better. So a PhD is a huge commitment. It's a commitment in a bunch of different ways. So first of all, it's a huge time commitment. In the US, it's often about 5 years or more. In other places, it's maybe less, but you have to do a master's. Either way, it eats up a big chunk of your time, and so you should be sure that that's what you want to spend your time doing. It's also a big monetary commitment. Even though often PhD programs will pay you a stipend, in computer science, it's just naturally true that there's opportunity cost in terms of pay to do a PhD. Now, with all of this commitment, you get benefits. And first is that the PhD unlocks quite a few things when it comes to job opportunities. So things like academic tenure track faculty jobs, research jobs at government labs, and industry research jobs all often require a PhD, and that's a good reason to do it if you're sure that those are directions you want to go in. And also, I think the process is often rewarding and hopefully fun. I've met lots of amazing people during my PhD. I've done research that I was really excited about. And so I think this is, it's a great opportunity from that perspective. Now, another thing in terms of kind of knowing what you're signing up for is that a PhD isn't just more school. There's a kind of misconception sometimes, I think, that PhD is undergrad plus plus, but I really don't think that's true for a few reasons. First, in a PhD, classes are not that important. You're there both to consume knowledge and to generate it, which is quite a bit different from undergrad, where most of the things that you're going to learn, someone has figured out before you. Also in a PhD, projects are going to last months or years, not just a few weeks like in undergrad. This means that if you're working on a project that you're not having too much fun with, you might have to just sort of push through and keep at it instead of throwing it away at the end of the semester or at the end of the week and saying, well, next week I'll work on something different. This is not a bad thing. It means that you get to work on projects longer term and get more done, but it can be hard to keep at one thing for a while. Also, and this phrase is courtesy of a friend of mine, Cassia Torkson, no one's going to give you a good grade in PhD. You PhD students often get grades. They don't mean anything. The actual measure of success as a PhD student is a lot more kind of situational and personal than that. And so you need to be able to find motivation other than the report card at the end of the semester in order to know that you're doing well. And I'll talk more about how to find that motivation in a bit. Finally, you're not supposed to know everything. In undergrad, there's going to be an exam, and you have to know everything for the exam. In a PhD, you are probably working in an area where you can't know everything because some things are open problems. And so managing uncertainty and being comfortable with not knowing is really key and really important. My final bit of advice in terms of knowing what you're signing up for is to try taking a gap year. I think Sam was talking before that she did that. I did that. I worked for a year between my undergrad and PhD. There's a few ways to do it. I actually got my PhD position, deferred it, worked for a year, and then started. But other friends of mine have just gone to industry, worked for a while. And actually, that's even better in terms of knowing what you're signing up for because it gives you time to really research what folks are doing and get a sense over time of the kinds of research that particular advisors are working on. So if you're really not sure, you can try taking a gap year. Any questions so far? Does this first direction kind of make sense? Cool. Yeah.
What do you do when a project fails? What do you do when a project fails? Like, do you publish why does it fail? Or?
I will talk about failure later. Don't worry. But thank you for the question. OK, my next piece of advice is going to be about productivity. And it's to work the way you work best. Productivity is a highly personal thing, especially in research, where it doesn't quite match the kind of cadence of a normal job that well. So I'll talk about a few aspects of productivity, but one to start with is when should you be working? This came up in the panel, I think, earlier as well. I think a reasonable place to start is a 9 to 5. It's a reasonable separation of work and life. You'll be free at the times that your non-PhD friends are free. And it's kind of a good kind of baseline standard. Now, knowing the kind of people who do PhDs, you might shift that to 10 to 6 or something like that. Not as many early risers in my experience. But I also encourage you to play around with weirder things. So there's good research that shows that people aren't always productive at exactly the same times. And so I found during my PhD that my best productivity hours for focused work were between 8 and 11 a.m. and 8 and 11 p.m. That's right after I get up or right before I go to bed. And by noticing that about myself, first of all, I was able to kind of work in the times when I was most effective. But I also didn't feel bad if I was playing video games at 2 p.m. Right? That's okay. I was working during the hours when I was most productive, and I wasn't trying to be productive during the times when I knew I wouldn't be that productive. I just encourage you to try to learn this for yourself. It can be super helpful, especially when you need to do like a lot of very focused work, like as a deadline's coming up. Now, of course, with all this discussion of time, I should point out that I actually think success shouldn't really be measured in terms of time, but instead should be measured in terms of effort. If you spend effort on a thing and make some progress or get stuck, if you've kind of worked through your problem, it doesn't quite matter how many hours your butt has been in the chair. I'm going to repeat some advice that Sam Westrick gives in his talk because I hadn't heard it said out loud before. But if you put in 3 solid hours of work in a day and you're tired or stuck, just stop. Go do something else. Work on a different project. Do your laundry. Do something else because if you hit a wall and you're tired, you're just not going to be making that much more progress after that. And I think once I accepted this, I was able to balance work and life quite a bit better, I think. So don't worry about exactly 8-hour days every day. I think that the point is to be putting consistent effort in over a longer period of time. My next point when it comes to working the way you work best is organization. There's a lot of information to manage as a PhD student. You have your research, you have notes about meetings, you have all sorts of things like that. And I think if you are able to keep things a little bit organized, you're going to have an easier time. Now, some people are organization resistant. That's okay. What I'm going to do is tell you the things that I think are the most critical for you to keep organized, and then you can decide if you want to organize the rest. The first is to take some notes during meetings or right after meetings. This is really important as a courtesy to your advisor and your collaborators. You don't want to forget what someone said in a meeting and have them have to keep repeating it to you. And you also want to make sure that you're capturing this to make that time worth it, because meetings are, take a bunch of effort and time. Also, jot down the things you do during the week, just short bullet points, so that you can tell your advisor, your supervisor, what you've done. This is a thing that I've heard from a lot of kind of early PhD students, is that they get to their meeting and they say, I haven't done anything this week. And you absolutely have. You've been spending that time and effort. You just need to remember what you've done and where you got stuck so that you can actually talk about it with your supervisor. And finally, I think the most important is a calendar. This, even I think the most organization-resistant PhD students I know have some form of calendar. You have a lot of appointments and a lot of meetings, and a lot of these are with people who are kind of important. And so not missing those and being able to manage that effectively is really important. Now, if any of you are like real productivity nerds, I have quite a few apps and other things that I use. I have my whole system. I decided that wouldn't be worth spending a lot of time on in this talk, but if you're interested in that kind of stuff, I will talk your ear off about it later. I think the more important thing is that you have some kind of a system that works for you. Finally, on productivity, productivity starts with taking care of yourself. There's no sense in optimizing your note-taking strategy if you're not getting enough sleep. So taking care of yourself, your physical and your mental health is the first thing to keep you productive. Everything else really comes after that. Any questions on working the way you work best? OK, we'll have time for more questions later, so we'll get into that. Next, find and foster a strong advising relationship. Your advisor is one of the most important professional contacts you will have during your career, especially if you're going to stay in academia, but even if you're not. Your advisor can do a bunch of things for you. So the most obvious thing is that they're going to help guide your research. But actually, they're there for a lot more than that. They can advocate for you at your university, connect you to other academics to start collaborations. I'll talk about collaborations more in a bit. And they can also recommend you for future jobs, especially if you want to stay in academia. This one's incredibly important. And so it's really important that you and your supervisor are on the same page. And so in order to kind of stay on the same page, I'm going to give you kind of two sets of advice. I'm going to split this in half, one for if you don't have an advisor yet and one for if you do. So if you're looking for an advisor, here's some quick advice. First, ask what they're hiring for. Some advisors have a specific project in mind that they want a student to work on. Other advisors are hiring a bit more flexibly. The reason you want to know this is because some advisors won't be super upfront about this, and I've seen students get into situations where they think they're going to be doing a PhD on whatever they want, and actually they're doing a PhD on a pretty constrained thing that was already decided for them. You can absolutely ask questions about this, and you should when meeting with potential advisors. As much as advisors say, like, we want to protect students from the realities of funding, my experience has been that those realities are just a little bit too complicated for students to always be insulated from that. Next, look for someone whose interests, personality, and work style work for you. This is hard. You can and should have many conversations with a potential advisor, ask them about their advising style. Some advice was given on this at the panel as well. Do your best to find someone who you really think you can work well with. And finally, believe current students about their experiences with an advisor. I can't count the number of times that I've seen students not believe what they were told about a person being difficult to work with or sort of difficult in other ways. You're probably not built different. It's just the facts of life. And so if a student is telling you their advisor is a problem, you should believe them. Now, if you already have an advisor, you should make sure to be checking in regularly for feedback and high-level guidance. It is very easy to walk into a meeting week after week and give research updates only, but that's not all your advisor's there for. They're there to help you with the higher level goals of your PhD as well. And so make sure you're having conversations about, how am I doing? What do you think I should be doing next to achieve my goals? Just don't forget to have those conversations. If you don't understand or if you disagree with something your advisor is telling you to do, ask why. Don't sort of aggressively challenge their authority, but ask why they're asking you to do this. I had an experience with a couple of friends of mine. Their advisor told them to take a class. They were like, we don't understand why. I said, well, what did he say? And they hadn't asked. It turns out the advisor had forgotten what classes the students had taken, advised them to take some classes. There was a whole mix-up. It all could have been avoided if there was just a little bit more back and forth on that. And I think the most important point with managing your advisor is to address things like conflicts as they come up, find a communication style that works. Your relationship with your advisor is like your relationship with any other human, which is that communication is the hard part, and you need to figure out a way to do it effectively. It's easier said than done, but you should do your best at it. I have a couple of brief points for if you have an advisor and it isn't working out. This is a much more complicated topic, and so I don't want to go too deep into it. But one thing from my experience is that if there's a topic mismatch, if you feel like the topic you're working on just isn't something you're excited about, I really encourage you to earnestly try to find things you like about the topic. I started my PhD not liking the topic that I had. I spent a while trying to get out of it, trying to find other things I could do. Eventually, I came back to it because I found the part of it that I was really excited about. And I think that I'm really glad I did that, and I think that that's a really good strategy. You can also try to find related topics or ask if you can change projects, or look for a co-advisor. That one's a little bit trickier, but it can work. I've seen it work for people. If there's a personality match, that's trickier. If it feels safe, you can try communicating about the issues. But I think, especially for folks who want the academic track, if you have a serious personality clash with your advisor, if you really can't work with them, it's going to be hard to get their good letters of recommendation and things like that down the road, and you may not want to deal with that. So you might want to look into finding an alternate advisor. For more on advising, I recommend Steve Chong's talk from POPL PLMW 2023, Care and Feeding of Advisors. There's lots of other advice on this too. I didn't go into nearly the amount of detail that there is on the topic. Okay. Next up, consider collaboration. Now, this piece of advice is inspired by the title of a different talk, which Sam mentioned earlier today. Sam and I did a double act at this year's POPL PLMW, where we gave a talk on collaboration about our collaboration. I think it is slightly ironic that we're both giving talks at this PLMW and not collaborating, although we actually did. We were trading slides back and forth like that, so no one's going to keep us from collaborating. I'm going to just give you like a quick speed run of that talk here, but I encourage you to watch it if you're excited about collaboration. Collaboration adds new ideas, expertise, and perspectives to your research. While it is not always easy and takes work and effort and energy to maintain, I think if done right, it's really the core and crux of what good research is. I think collaboration is the most fun way to do research. I think it's often the most effective way to do research. Some folks do great work on their own. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think collaboration for a lot of people is really the way to go. Quick anecdote on some collaborations I've done. This is actually not the story that has to do with Sam. I'm sorry, Sam. So in spring 21, this is about 2 years into my PhD, I was getting a little bit nervous because there were a bunch of potential paths ahead of me, and I didn't know which one was right. I also had a feeling that there were paths that I didn't see, but I didn't see them, so I couldn't tell if those were going to be important paths to try to take. And Andrew Head, an HCI researcher, assistant professor at Penn, had just started, and my advisor Benjamin encouraged me to go talk to him and try to collaborate. Through my collaboration with Andrew, I was able to prune some of the search on potential projects and clarify some of the things that I was missing. And that collaboration turns out to be one of the more successful things that I did during my PhD, and none of that would have happened without that collaboration. And I'll close this little subsection with a ridiculous graphic that I did for the Consider Collaboration talk. It was Sam's idea, I think. Any quick questions on collaboration, if you have them?
What do you know about cultural barriers?
Cultural barriers, is that?
Yeah, so you have I'm going a bit back to the advisor part. So when you have an advisor and you have lots of cultural barriers which exist in most cases, how do you go about this? And yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so this is a deep and complex topic that I don't feel super comfortable speaking off the cuff about. But let's chat later about that because I think it's really important. There's also, in terms of collaboration and cultural barriers, there's a whole section of the Consider Collaboration talk that Sam did about collaborating across cultures. So that might also be helpful.
On the same way, it's a comment about finding an advisor. It's not possible in every country because academics not prepared for this, but personally, I highly recommend testing the advisor beforehand if you can. It's, in my personal experience, last year I did an internship with someone at the end of my master and just didn't work. And luckily, my school gave us an extra year to be able to test multiple people to choose our PhD advisor if we want to do a PhD. And this makes a great difference.
Yes, that's a great idea. It's very difficult to tell from just conversations if you'll work well with a person. So testing, if it's possible, great idea. OK, I'm going to move on to my next kind of direction, which is to manage projects optimistically. Maybe at the beginning of your PhD, your advisor will give you a project and a deadline and things like that. But eventually, you'll be setting your own path and figuring out what you're going to do by yourself. And when it comes to that, my advice is to, when planning projects, manifest success. Act as if things are going to go the way that you'd really like them to, as if the thing that you hope will happen, and plan accordingly. So there's a few ways you can do that. First, start writing before you've nailed down all the details of the work. I often start writing as soon as I have any ideas, even when I have a problem but no solution. This is important for a few reasons. First, you don't forget how and why you did things early on. It's easy by the time you get to writing things up to forget what you did at the beginning. But also, it really gives you a head start in thinking about how to present the work and how to tell others about what you've done, which is ultimately going to be a very important part of the research process. Next, choose a venue like a conference or journal before you have a result. Usually in the first few weeks of a project, I've said, this would be cool for ICFP. Let's try for that, or some other conference or something like that. It doesn't mean you're actually going to end up publishing it there, but I think having a paper and a place that you're going to send that paper as a goal is a really good way to motivate you. And I've heard people kind of bad-mouthing this approach, saying, like, you should just do good work and the publications will follow. And, like, maybe that works for some people, but for me, I'm much more motivated about the idea of presenting a cool thing to my friends at a conference and having in mind what that conference will be. So I try to kind of have this in mind early. Also, another way to be optimistic is to go for deadlines, even if you're not sure you can hit them. Quite a few times during my PhD, when there was a month or 2 months until a deadline, a project kind of came together at the last minute, and we went for it. Sometimes we made it, sometimes we didn't. But usually, even in the going for it and failing, there's a lot to be gained there. And finally, consider new projects that seem cool, even if you aren't sure you have time right now. You can start a project, start thinking about things, start taking notes on an idea, start talking to potential collaborators before you're really ready to work on the project. This lets you hit the ground running when you actually do have time, and you're kind of solving problems in the background once you know that this is a problem that you actually want to solve. The way I didn't start my PhD this optimistic, so this is my advisor, Benjamin, and the way the conversations early in my PhD went were often something like this. I would say, there's obviously no time for us to do that thing. And he would say, are you sure? Like, we could try. And I would sort of, jump up and down and say, no, blah, blah, blah. And he would just sort of sit there and stare at me for a bit. Until finally, I said, oh, fine, we'll try it. And for a while, I thought this was him sort of pushing me too hard as a student. But there's another key to this optimism thing. And Benjamin really did believe in this, which is when planning projects and manifesting success, it's OK if you fail. If you set an aggressive deadline and then miss it, that's okay. If you manifest submitting to ICFP and you submit to a smaller workshop instead, that's still great, right? The point is not to push yourself beyond your limits. It's instead to make sure that when something is within your limits, you are trying to achieve it. Now, on this point of failure, this is not enough to say about failure. So I have a whole final piece. And the last piece of advice I'll give you today is don't panic. This is by far the one that's the most easy said and the least easy, much easier said than done. Because getting a PhD is hard. This is not an easy thing that folks are signing up to do. And you're going to fail sometimes during this process. I can't think of anyone who didn't have any rejections during their PhD. If anyone knows of anyone like that, let me know. But I can't imagine it. And in the interest of being transparent about failure, I'm going to share some of my failures with you. This is a picture of me from a rejection party that we had at Penn. We printed out a bunch of things that were rejected, and we taped them on the wall, and we took pictures with them. It was great fun. And these are a bunch of failures. These are a bunch of papers that I wrote and submitted, and they didn't get in, or fellowship applications, or grants. It didn't work out. But the thing to remember about failures like these is that they aren't final. So this is what happened to this work. Almost none of these things truly fell on the floor, and I didn't get anything out of them. The majority of these things that I failed at eventually, after retrying and putting more work and time and effort into them, worked out. And so the thing to take away from this is that failure is often temporary. And so the kind of not panicking and knowing that after a week or two of thinking that everything is the worst, you can pick yourself back up and say, okay, we'll try for another conference, I think is a really critical skill for an academic. I have one more anecdote, a little more specifically on failures, which is my worst ever conference review. I do testing, and the review says that it's a bad paper about random testing. That wasn't fun to read. To add insult to injury, they said, I want to accept it into the Haskell workshop, but reject it from ICFP. It was rejected from the Haskell workshop, too. Now, the funny thing about this is that this paper was accepted the next year at ICFP as a distinguished paper. And this is not even the only paper I've heard that story about. Other people with distinguished papers have told me, yes, that happened to me too. It was rejected a couple of times before it was accepted. And lots of good work went into this paper in between the rejections. It got better and better. We learned what story we were trying to tell, and eventually the paper got published. Now, none of this is to say that the sort of reviewing culture in academia is not a little bit broken. There are some problems with it, for sure. But just remember when you're getting reviews back, if they're not what you'd like, it may be much better next time. The big takeaway is a bad day or week or month doesn't mean you won't succeed at your PhD, so please don't panic. I think that's going to be it for me. These are my 6 pieces of advice. This is my website. If you want to know more about me, my contact info is there. I would love to take more questions, and I'll be around for the rest of the conference. Please do talk to me. I would like to be the kind of person in the community that folks feel like they can just walk up to and talk to about things, so please do come up to me and chat. Thank you.
I just wanted to do the first question to break the ice. Yeah, so because you suggested this kind of 3-hour work thing, but you know, what about more extreme things, right? So, because I know people that like, you know, they'll work really hard for 2 days and then do nothing for 5 days, and then. So, what you have any thoughts about that?
I think what you mean exactly by do nothing is really kind of important. I think I have had many days during my PhD where I did nothing. And that's not just weekends, it's days where I tried to do work and got nothing done. This is totally normal, I think, for research work, especially. If you're finding that there's a significant pattern to the fact that you're really not able to work many days, I think this is a problem to consult a mental health professional about. But I think that like my point about there's no right and wrong cadence of work as long as you're getting what you want to get done is sort of my take.
So I wanted to ask, do you have any advice for how you manage convincing yourself that you need to manage things? So like handling that whole like, yes, I should be taking time to, you know, take care of my mental health or whatnot, and I'll do that just as soon as this is done because I don't have time to do that right now.
I'll say this is one of the hard parts. You know, it's very hard to remember to take breaks. I think having people that you are accountable to for that, getting your friends involved, making sure that the people around you know that you need to take a break and help you to enforce that. But yeah, it's really hard. I mean, I certainly haven't taken as many like real breaks during my PhD as I should have, I think. I think there's a kind of ongoing struggle there, but it's the kind of thing that it's worth struggling with because you will just burn out if you don't do something like that. So yeah, I don't have much concrete advice there besides good luck. It's tricky, but it's worth trying.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the talk. It's very encouraging that when you say once before you get paper published that you got rejected, even if it's a distinguished paper or such. So I believe the paper you eventually got accepted and got awards, sometimes it's no longer the same paper that you submitted when you got rejected. So can you tell us more what did you do in the middle? Like, what is the key thing you think you should do the packaging to make the paper actually succeed?
That's a great question. I think it's a paper by paper thing. I think the thing that happened with this paper, which by the way is also Sam's distinguished paper, is that we found the case study and the use case that sold it. So we didn't change that much of the kind of technical contribution, but I think research is a lot more than just the core technical contribution. It's also convincing people that it's a useful contribution, convincing people that there's a reason that technical contribution should exist. And so sometimes the change is in the story, the motivation. And so like one thing that we did over the course of the way this paper was edited was read a lot more in the area to see if we could find problems that this could solve, and also talk a lot more with other people in the space to see if they needed this thing. But that advice won't generalize. I think it's just it's all the things that make a good paper, but just continuing to do it after you've submitted the first time.
Thank you.
During your successful PhD career, was there anything that you regretted doing?
I'm sure there are. I don't have things off the top of my head. I mean, I feel like the point I made at the very beginning about luck, it's one of those things where if anything had been a little bit different, I might not have been in the situations that turned out to be the ones I needed to be in. So it's just the butterfly effect here means that like any regret is potentially, you know, if I were to redo one thing, I just have no idea what else would be different and how else things would have changed. So I don't think I have I can't point to a particular thing.
If you happen to if a project goes very south and you realize that it isn't feasible anymore, what do you do with all that work? Do you have you happen to document it or post it or something like that?
Yeah, so this is a great question. There's a few of the things that didn't end up getting republished somewhere. I still have kind of in the background, and occasionally, you know, there's a draft up on my website, and people will occasionally ask about it because they come across it, and I guess I just sort of hold out hope that one of those times they will bring me the use case or the technical nugget or something like that that would turn it from a failure into a success, and then, you know, someday later there's another thing to publish. But I think it's also just totally okay if you, like, it's research. It's going to not work sometimes. And so if a thing really isn't working, sometimes you put it off to the side and never come back to it, and that's okay.
Okay, I think that's a wonderful discussion. As Harry said, he will be around for the conference, so we can take more questions offline. And thanks, Harry, again for this great talk.
Thank you.